Hola, ¿qué tal, amigas y amigos? Muy buenas noches. En esta ocasión, nuevamente, tratamos de traer ante ustedes un personaje de la vida política europea. Yo creo que todos tenemos mucho que informarnos y que conocer de cómo opera el sistema europeo, cómo opera el sistema parlamentario. Entonces va a ser una conversación sumamente interesante. Okay, here we are with Yves, Prime Minister of Belgium, and personality on the political world in Europe and the political world in Belgium. So Yves, welcome to our program.
Welcome.
We're going to have a conversation around something that is not well known here in America, in Mexico, Latin America, even in the United States. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start our first part of the program with us speaking about Belgium itself. But before that, your career. I understand you've been a politician for long, since you were a young guy in Belgium. Tell us a little bit about your career throughout the ranks of the Democracia Cristiana.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. I'm very happy to meet you again and to have this conversation. So I'm Yves Leterme. I was born in 1960 in a western part of Belgium, which is quite a small country. I think we will talk about Belgium later. I grew up in a family, interesting to mention, with a French-speaking father and a Dutch-speaking mother. And the French-speaking part and the Dutch-speaking part, these are the two main parts of Belgium, and it's part of the specific history of Belgium. I grew up, I went to school, I went to high school, and at a certain moment I was protesting against the fact that they would build a new expressway not far from the place where I was living. And by this protest, we were, I think, some 50, 60 young people of 17, 18, 19 years old. We were at a certain moment asked by the municipality and by the then leader of the Christian Democrats in the region, well, given the fact that you know better how to solve problems, please let's have a conversation. I want to listen to you, what is happening and what your opinion is. And that was the real start of an interaction with the leadership of the Christian Democratic Party in my region, which was then the biggest one, the most important one. And I continued my studies at university, studied law and political science. But step by step, I stayed in touch with these people in my municipality. And at a certain moment, they thought that I was gaining popularity, and they asked me to be on their list of candidates. And so it started. Step by step, I was a candidate for the local elections. I was a candidate for the national elections. In Belgium, we have a complicated system, federal system, like in Mexico, but with only 2 communities. But we have different parliaments, so I've been running for all parliaments. And at a certain moment then, after serving also as the general secretary of my party, the Christian Democrats, I entered parliament. I grew up through the ranks, and after a couple of years, I was the leader of the opposition. And at a certain moment, I managed to win the elections and to take over, first at the regional level, and then at the federal level. And so I had my federal, the leadership of Belgium in terms of the prime ministership from 2008 to 2011. But besides that, I did foreign affairs, I did budget, agriculture, minister president of my region. And so that's it. And afterwards, I went to work with Angel Gurria at the OECD, but that's then after the Belgian political career.
Excellent story. Let me ask you two questions here. Number one, about the big highway. What was the case? What was the problem? Were you protecting environment or were you promoting communications to your region?
Well, it was in fact a highway that at that moment, it's a very anecdotal, small element, but there was no space for young guys going to the school because the highway, and it's built in between. I opened it, by the way. I opened the highway that I was protesting against. So, but the problem was that this highway was only for cars, and there was nothing foreseen to allow the young kids going to school to pass the highway through a tunnel in a safe way. And as soon as this was fixed, it was not so much an environmental issue. It was more about safety on the roads. I had well, it's a long story, but the people that were protesting were from were from a college where a young guy was dead in traffic the year before. And so it was also a reason why we were so critical for this highway, with no possibility from our village to the city, to the school, to pass it in a safe way. That was the issue, yeah. But we managed to get what we asked for, so they have adapted the plans. Yeah.
So you had in your heart and in your mind dealing with people's problem, dealing with community problem. Is that the moment when within yourself was raised the interest or the purpose to participate in politics, or until the Christian Democrats came to you, or you had in mind that maybe that was your purpose, your dream to work for the community?
Well, I wanted to do something in the public sphere, but to be fair and to be honest, I was, number one, very surprised by the openness of the political leadership at that time in my region. I was very surprised that they just said, well, Guy, you know better how to handle this, apparently, because you are protesting against us. So we want to listen to you. I was surprised by this open attitude. And that was a lesson that served me later also. I think when politicians are open to people and are open to be criticized. And so I was very surprised. And I went then to meetings, and step by step, they did it in a very keen and intelligent way. They introduced us in their meetings with 5 or 6 of these young people. And so when I then studied at university, let's say 2 or 3 years later, I studied for practical reasons at a university that was not at all with a Christian democratic atmosphere. But that made me think about, that made me read books about Christian democracy, about socialism, about liberalism. And so, having been in touch with Christian democracy in my municipality, I was interested to read more about this. And step by step, I was more and more convinced that that was quite close to the view I had on let's say, the interaction between citizens and political leadership and how people should behave in a society. So it came step by step. Yeah.
Is that university the most famous university of Lovaina, or that came later?
No. I did first 2 years in a subsection of Leuven, but then I went to the University of Ghent, which is a university that was very much oriented to all what is non-Christian Democrat. It's more a non-Catholic university. But as a reaction to what I perceived when I was a student as non-true comments on Christian democracy, that was then the leading political power in my country. So there was a lot of criticism amongst professors, and I was critical to their criticism. And I started to read about it, and I was a little bit standing against what my professors then were teaching about what Christian Democrats were doing. And so that negative criticism, I found it not really based on good arguments, And that made me read more and get more acquainted with ideology. And at a certain moment, I think I was 21, 22, I decided to become an active member of the Christian Democratic Party in Flanders. Yeah.
Yes, I come back to Lovaina because my main professor, teacher, and mentor in my university that I went in Mexico came from Lovaina, which I understand is a Jesuit university. You did go to Lovaina?
I did, in fact, I studied law and political science, and a part of my law studies were in Leuven, was in, what do you say, Lovaina, yeah.
Lovaina. Well, that's the name we got here in Mexico for this. It was Padre Scheifler, the father, which was very European-like, very Belgium-like, very flamenco type, and a big, strong character. But anyway, tell me now a little bit about little Belgium in territory, but fantastic, big in accomplishments and in quality of life for its people.
Yeah, Belgium, first of all, is quite a small country, as you already mentioned yourself. I think in terms of surface, it's 10,000 square kilometers. When you ride your car, you drive it for 1.5 hours and you are from the one side of the country to the other. It's 11 million people, 30,000 square kilometers, 30,000 square kilometers, 11 million people, and it's located what we call in the heart of Western Europe. It's a kind of gateway to Europe, very good infrastructure, but it was created some 180, 190 years ago as a kind of buffer state between the then already always conflicted nations like the what now is the Germans, the English, the French. And so at the Congress of Vienna, the powers that were then let's say the diplomatic powers, they decided that there should be a kind of buffer state between these big blocks. And so that was Belgium, was then created. So it's a diplomatic creation. And what is very typical for Belgium, and it's really impactful for the politics and for understanding Belgian politics. What very specific is for Belgium, it's located on the language border and the border of cultures in Europe. So we are located on the border between the more Nordic, German, Northern European languages and culture. And on the other hand, the southern part is more belonging to the Latin, French-speaking parts and culture in Europe. But this means, to put it very concretely, this means that you don't have such a thing as a Belgian language. So people speak different languages. Number two, you don't have Belgian newspapers. People read different newspapers because you have Flemish, Dutch-speaking newspaper in Dutch language and in French language. We don't have national political parties. We only have regional political parties. So for instance, in Mexico, you have Mexican political parties. We don't have Belgian political parties. We watch different TV programs and stations. You don't have one Belgian TV station. You have, for each community has its own. So Belgium is almost 200 years old or young, 11 million people, the gateway to Europe, small surface, and it's located at the border of the culture, the Nordic German culture and the French-speaking Latin culture.
In main economic sector, what brings income to Belgium and to people from Belgium?
Currently, we do a lot about logistics. So we have, in the northern part, we have some important sea harbors, like Antwerp is a very important harbor. So we do a lot of logistics, means container handling, distribution all over Europe of goods. But we also have some very important industrial sectors. For instance, it is related to COVID now, it's really often in the news. We are one of the main countries in producing vaccines. So for instance, the Pfizer vaccines, they are produced in Belgium. So we have a tradition to have Johnson & Johnson, GSK, Pfizer, all big pharmaceutical industries are established in Belgium. We have service industry also, we have different parts of the industry. Very typical for Belgium is that we have a lot of SMEs. The biggest employer in Belgium employs 7,000 people, is GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. That's the biggest one. So we don't have bigger employers than 7,000. So most of the employers in Belgium are small and medium enterprises, which is a landscape with a lot of diversity, and which makes us also quite resilient to economic crises. So we never go very high up in terms of economic development. So our growth would always be a little bit less than, let's say, the UK, the US, or other mature economies. But we also, on the other hand, never go down very much, because we have this typical resilience through our network of SMEs, our landscape of SMEs. Yeah.
We have to go to a shortcut on the break, and we'll be right back. Very interesting what we're discussing.
Thank you.
Okay, Yves, we are back again into our program. Now let's move into Europe. Because of the lack of information, give us a description of the origin and the why to conform the European Union. Number two is expansion to the original members, and then the scale up to the new members lately. Please give us that story.
In a nutshell, the idea of European integration was a genius idea. It was after the Second World War. 2 or 3 founding fathers said, well, if we want to avoid this always coming back conflicts in Europe, the First World War, the Second World War, even in the 19th century. So if we want to avoid this for the future, we have to integrate the economies of Germany and France. We have to integrate the industry that produces weapons. That is the core of the economy of these 2 blocks that always fight such terrible wars against each other. And so that was a brilliant idea, and they started the Community for Coal and Steel. And then step by step, this group, they started with 6 countries. So with Germany, France, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, the Benelux, and Italy, these 6 countries. And so they integrated their steel and coal. But then step by step, the integration went so well, under the impulse also of US help, the Marshall Plan for Europe, ideas grew to enlarge, to widen the scope of cooperation, because there were lots of parts of the economy that at a certain moment started to be also interested in closer cooperation. For instance, French companies were interested in German companies to cooperate. And so step by step, this integration went further. Crucial was at a certain moment that the decision was taken to have a common market, to open the borders, to have no customs anymore between these 6 countries. And then we go a couple of decades further. There was an enlargement of the group of countries, first with countries like Denmark, then later also the UK, Spain, Portugal, Greece. Let's say the most important recent wave of expansion of Europe was linked to, again, the genius idea of people like Helmut Kohl and François Mitterrand. That was that after the implosion of the Soviet Union, Central and Eastern Europe had to be stabilized. So countries like Poland, Bulgaria, Hungary, the Baltic states that were under the influence, that had been developing under the influence of Russia within the Soviet Union system, there was the strong political will to reunite Germany with East Germany out of the Soviet bloc, but also to stabilize Central and Eastern Europe by opening the membership of the European Union to countries like then Czechoslovakia, Czechia and Slovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Poland, and the 3 Baltic states. And so this was a very strong political decision, and that was then the most recent increase of the membership. We also had Cyprus, Malta, some smaller countries that had joined in between. And of course, most recently, we lost the UK, but that's the way geographically the European Union has been growing. Now there's a lot of discussion about whether Turkey would be a member state in the future. That's quite uncertain because there's a lot of culture and political difference between European Union and Turkey. But I think what could happen in let's say the next decade is that at least parts of the Balkan will join the European Union. We already have Slovenia, small country, but also countries like Serbia. We already have Croatia also, but also countries like Serbia, like Montenegro, like Northern Macedonia and so on. These also could join Europe. And this, of course, is, at least from a symbolic point of view, would be very important because, for instance, the First World War started in the Balkan region, beginning of the 20th century. And the last biggest conflict in Europe was the conflict in the Balkan countries with the Bosnia-Herzegovina and the war with Sarajevo that was destroyed. So I think there's still a strong political will to overcome the hurdles of protest by citizens that are a bit fed up with the opening of borders to new member states. But I think there's still a strong political will, again, to stabilize and to bring peace to that part of Europe.
I'm a fan. I'm an absolute fan of the process of the European community that has taken millions and millions of people out of poverty zone, out of being lower middle class, into a highly developed, sophisticated middle class and upper classes. And that success nobody can deny. This one for all and all for one has worked extremely well. How do we explain then the case of the Brexit, of Britain abandoning the European Union? The reasons why, how does it affect the process of scaling and growing of the European Union, and what's going to happen with Britain?
Yeah, I think European Union, the common market, as you mentioned yourself, has really worked as a kind of elevator to social and economic progress by liberalizing trade, by having this common market of 450 to 500 million people with a very important purchasing power, to have this common free market and free movement of goods and persons. This has given opportunities for poorer parts of Europe to really become more wealthy. So far, so good. And I think that the UK was very much interested in that and benefited also a lot of these dynamics. But there has always been a kind of schizophrenic part of the relationship between the UK and the continent. The UK came to the European Union to have the open market, but the other member states, they wanted to go further. And it was very clear from the start that the UK never wanted to go further, never wanted to integrate more. It's an island state, the UK. They have this isolationism. They have a very important history also as a very important country worldwide, global power. And then at a certain moment, I was part of the Council of the European Union when that happens. The part of the backbenchers, of the conservatives that were, let's say, fueled by populists and demagoguery, by populist movement, but also by this typically British tabloids, these newspapers, they have been under the influence of all kinds of stories that were told about Brussels bureaucracy. And so the fact that they had the open market, that the European Union wanted to go further, this was rejected by a very important part of the political leadership, of the conservatives, smaller part of labor, but also by the ordinary citizens, by farmers, by people that became unemployed. So the scapegoating of Europe worked out. And so there was a kind of love-hate relation with the European Union. And at a certain moment, Cameron, to stabilize his majority, decided to organize a referendum about the membership of the European Union, the UK membership of the European Union. And I like David Cameron very much, but I think that that was a very dangerous gamble. Certainly at that moment, where the economy was going down, where there was a lot of resentment amongst the population. And so the result, the outcome was very uncertain. I think that David himself, he was convinced that he would win the referendum, and so that he would solve the issue for once and ever, so to say. But of course, you know, demagoguery, populism, well, it turned out to be different as a result. It was quite sharp. It was close to 50-50, but still, the result was to leave, to have the Brexit in 2016, and it lasted 4 or 5 years to negotiate and to find a settlement. But I'm convinced that although the UK decided to leave the European Union, we should continue to consider them as our best allies, as our best friends. We need each other. And to be fair, most important for them has always been the markets, the open market. It's good for us also. So let's have a level playing field. Let's strengthen the level playing field, but let's have this cooperation, this working together with the UK in the future. No resentment, no negative feelings about the fact that they left us. And let's look to the future. Yeah.
I hope that happens. I hope that happens for the better of both sides, the continent and the island. Would you think that there was some ideological support for the idea of breaking? Because later on, with President Trump here, which is a very strong promoter of nation state, building walls, isolating, and working on your own. So they seem to have matched the idea with Britain, although they express it publicly like that. And that's ideological, this idea of coming back to this strong state nationalism like we had 100 years ago, which is preoccupying to the future of the world. If we divide, if we build walls, instead of building bridges, instead of working united. Was there any of this ideological ingredient of this promoters of the nation state?
I think you're right that to a certain extent there was a kind of resurgence of national feeling and of this isolationism that has always been present. Well, it's an island state after all, and so it's quite obvious that they have a kind of feeling of we against all the others, and so this isolationism had always been there. So there were strong national feelings, but I think I'm quite nuanced. I would say that also from the European side, the continent side, it's fair to say that the European Union sometimes is big on small things and is small on big things. And I think that the part of the public opinion in the UK is suffering. The farmers, steel workers, coal mine workers, people that lost their jobs, people in the Midlands, poor people, that they got the impression that the whole of the European integration at the end of the day was something for the rich one, the wealthies, the city of London, and that the other part of England was just forgotten. And then when you have, for instance, a common market, you have to standardize products, otherwise you can't have a common market. And it's right that the European Commission, the so-called European Brussels bureaucracy, has been very active over the last 30, 40 years to find out all kinds of regulations to decide on the size of even fruit and so on. So part of this is true, but it's because of the common market. But this has been used as by tabloids to ridiculize, to laugh at what well, the Commission and European integration was doing. And I think at the end of the day that lots of English people have taken this for the truth, for the reality, that Europe indeed was not really taking care of the ordinary people and was only busy with bureaucracy. Yeah.
If we have to go to a break, how short is
Yeah.
time when we're discussing such a great things? We would
Thank
be
you.
right back, this time pretty quickly because we're already connected.
Thank you.
Okay, Yves, we're right back with our audience. Now let's move into two subjects that are also very important for us to learn in America. Number one, you mentioned that Belgium doesn't even have political parties. How does the system operate there? How do you get a prime minister, and how the country is run by government?
So Belgium is composed of two big communities, the Flemish Dutch-speaking community and the French-speaking community. And so each of these communities has its own political parties. So when we need a government to form a new government, first we have elections, parliamentary elections, but these are in different constituencies. So the Flemish-speaking parties and the French-speaking parties come up with their list of candidates. And we not only have the division between these two communities, we also have a very hyper-proportional electoral system. With a parliament with 150 seats, we have the elections, but we also have this proportionality, but also a lot of very small parties. The biggest political party in Belgium only obtains, I think, something like 18–19% of the votes. So you need a lot of parties to form a coalition. So all the governments in Belgium are coalition governments. And so institutionally what happens is that we are a kingdom, we have a king. And the only moment the king plays an important role is the days after the elections. He invites the winner of the election, if there is a clear winner, because often there is no clear winner, but he invites the leader of the party that has got a good result. And he asks him to first to inform, to listen to the other parties, what they want, and then to propose a coalition. And at the end of that whole process, that can last very long, that can last 1 year, 1.5 years. But after this long process, a coalition is formed, most of the times with 5, 6, 7 parties. They negotiate a kind of contract, a governmental contract, and then there is a government formed. In our constitution, it's foreseen that the government is composed by 15 people maximum, the prime minister except, and it's 7 Dutch-speaking and 7 French-speaking. And then the prime minister can be from both communities. Until recently, it was I was the last Dutch-speaking one. Then we came with a couple of French-speaking ones, and now we again have a Dutch-speaking one. And so we have a bicameral system, chamber and Senate. And just to close, what is important is to know that this, like in Mexico, I can imagine, we are a federal government. So we have the same process and we have the same kind of government and parliaments at the level of the regions and communities. But these regions and communities, and that's the complexity of Belgium, in fact, these are only 2. So we have 7 governments, but they all gravitate around these 2 communities. Yeah.
Okay. What are the rights of those that accept the coalition, that were smaller parties? What rights do they have, or what is the right of the winner or the bigger party that convokes to a coalition? It's always convincing each other, is dialogue,
It's
negotiations,
yeah,
not power exercised by one or the other?
There's no constitutional provision that gives a specific power to the parties related to their electoral result. For instance, when I won the elections, I had a landslide victory, but still I was depending on very small parties to have a coalition agreement, to start to govern. The current prime minister was a candidate from the 5th party in the ranking. So it's only the 5th party in terms of the number of votes. It's really, and that's the reason why lots of Belgians are frustrated with the system. So between the outcome of the elections and the result of the election, who wins and who's the biggest one, and then the relation between that fact and then who leads the government, there's no clear relation. It's quite opaque. It's not very clear, and that's one of the weaknesses of our political system. So it's very complex. And number two, sometimes you have the losers of the elections that manage to form a coalition. This has been the case in the past. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for all that information. Now let's move into the last part of the program with the 2020 shock, mammoth shock of the pandemic, and how it came out to break all what we were doing. Thousands of people dying, thousands of problems for health. How did the system work in Belgium? How did government confront the pandemic, or society or people or citizens? But I guess government had to take the lead and had to bring solutions to confront this mammoth problem.
I would say that is specifically for Belgium, but it's also the case for some other European countries. I don't know what the situation was in Mexico at the beginning, but at the beginning, we have all underestimated COVID-19. We saw on our TV screens in January, February, all kinds of reports about what was happening in China. And suddenly it was happening in the northern part of Italy. But we had people skiing there. We had people going for tourism there. I'm involved in football. Well, we had football games, Atalanta Bergamo playing against Sevilla for the European Cup. And these were two regions where there was already COVID. So we have underestimated, and we were not quickly enough with very strict measures to limit the free movement of people. Number one. Number two, it is obvious, I don't know what the reality is in Mexico, but that in Europe, over the last 10, 15 years, the sovereignty in terms of masks, so the stock, the absence of good stocks of masks, of vaccines, of medical stuff, we have left this over to, well, we have imported this from China, from other countries, and we were not able anymore to produce these goods that you really need when you're confronted with such a pandemic. Number three, we had to, in March then, to take very strict measures, the lockdown, and this was quite well observed by people, but it was very difficult to go from a lockdown to a non-lockdown situation. And we had to learn step by step that in between a lockdown on the one hand, and on the other hand, to free people, free movement for people, that there is a lot of, there are a lot of steps in between, and that's specifically for the economy. And that's still a bit a problem, but I think we are on our way to solve this, that you have to find a way to let your economy still work, but in the same time to, let's say, to protect to the best way possible your people. And so this telework was then introduced, so people could work at home. Some vital services, the responsibility to operate vital services was kind of shared by different services and people. So this was a learning process. But I would say we underestimated, we were not prepared in terms of the vital goods we needed, and we lost sovereignty in producing masks and medical stuff. And then number three, to have your economy still running, this was a learning curve in Europe that was much more important than, for instance, in your case or the US, and certainly the Chinese economy went again very well, more rapidly than in Europe. Yeah.
Okay. Why having the big pharma operating in Belgium and specialized in vaccines, does that has brought an advantage to Belgium or to the Union, European Union?
That's now the number one issue in the political debate in Europe. So what is factual at this very moment is that most of these companies, they have ownership by US or by UK owners. And so what we see is that production by Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, and so on, that a lot of these produced vaccines are sold to Israel, to UK, to the US. And in Europe, for instance, in Belgium, we are now at 5% that has been receiving the vaccine. Meanwhile, in the UK, we are already at 15, 18%, in the US and in Israel, certainly more. So it's quite mixed feelings. We look at these things now. Lots of vaccines are produced in Europe, on the continent, but we still have difficulties to keep enough vaccines on the continent to have our own people served. Yeah.
What are decisions deposited in the European Union as a whole, the supra-government, European Union, or each individual country? How is it working right now, that relationship?
At this very moment, European Commission has a mandate to and has signed contracts with the main pharmaceutical companies to produce the vaccines and to provide and to deliver the vaccines. So it's European Commission, it's Mrs. van der Leyen herself, the President of the European Commission, and her team that negotiated the purchase of these vaccines, and it's equally distributed over the different European member states. And the idea, I think, is an excellent idea.
Yes.
But in practical reality, we saw that UK, US, Mr. Trump, Johnson also were very quick and threw money at the companies and got a kind of priority. And certainly also Israel managed to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, you imagine in our third world countries, our underdeveloped, well, that's a big word, that this fight on the top for the vaccines is maybe avoiding them to come down on a fair game.
We are trying with some colleagues, and I think that now over the last couple of weeks, things have improved. I think that in the European Union, people are now also convinced that you only can tackle COVID-19 if you help all the citizens of the world. It doesn't help you to have your own people receiving the vaccine. You also
don't work against vaccines.
Yeah, the world's population has to get access to the vaccine. And so the European Union is now investing a lot in providing vaccines to other non-European countries. Yeah.
Okay, in a brief description, because we're running out of time, after all this is finished, hopefully by 2021, what kind of world you see next? What kind of economy? What kind of way of living are we going to have?
I think in terms of economic policy, I think one of the biggest differences is these global value chains we have been seen developing over the last couple of decades as a consequence of globalizing trends and liberalizing trade. We have global value chains where a car is produced with all kinds of parts that come from China, from Mexico, from other countries. I think that some economic blocs will try to repatriate production of vital parts in their own countries. Well, there is currently a very important discussion about computer chips that are most of them produced in Taiwan. I think that kind of events will lots of the economies will try to avoid them. In terms of the more intimate and personal life of people, I think that we will have to live with, for the next maybe, 5-10 years, with limits to our free movement. I think that a vaccine passport, vaccination every year, that will start to be part of our daily lives. And also these very simple things like washing your hands, keeping a bit of distance, wearing masks in crowded places. I think it's there to stay. It will become part of our daily life. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. I'm sure that we will recover.
Home office.
I think that will stay to a certain extent. There was 2 days ago, quite an important study was published I think it was in the Netherlands, where they have proven that telework in terms of productivity in most of the cases delivers a better productivity than to go to one office and one place. And it made me think that, I don't know what your opinion is, President, it made me think that bringing people together to manufacture something or bringing people together in big office buildings is something of the last 150 to 200 years. It's only recent that we've done that. Maybe we will have a kind of going back to a more normal situation where things that can be done in homes, will be done there. And of course, we have to be very careful because that introduces new inequalities. Because then you have people on the labor market that cannot work from home. Some jobs have to be done in places. To nurses, teachers, and others, lots of these things have to be done in places. And so we have to be careful not to create new inequalities, I think. Yeah.
And football fans, would they keep coming to the World Cup by the hundreds of thousands or the millions?
Well, I hope that at least with our competition with UEFA, the Champions League and Europa League, that we very soon can organize again matches. I heard that there would be some testing, normally in April with matches. And so they still hope, for instance, the European Championship of Nations that in June normally takes place, that it will be, and the Olympic Games also, that it will take place with public. Yeah, let's hope. Yeah.
Yves, thank you. Thank you very much for
Muchas
all
gracias.
your interesting thoughts. I'm sure our audience is going to appreciate them.
Thank you very much.
Economists all over Mexico and part of the United States. So thank you. A lot of things we learned.
Thank you.
And see you
nice.
soon. Bye-bye. Good luck.
Very nice to meet you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Muchas gracias.